Hello for everyone joining in. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We have such an amazing panel talking about their background in writing and how they will be using it or how they use it as a conversation designer. For attendees joining us, if you want to throw into the chat where you're joining from, where you are in your conversation design journey, anything else that you'd like to share, please do that. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for everyone who is still joining in. Please put your where you're joining in from. I know we have people from all over the world that registered. So appreciate you being with us today. We have, hey Larry, you're in Phoenix. Deviansh is in India. Monique from the Netherlands. Awesome. Love seeing a group from all over. DC and New York City, Indonesia. So awesome. Alrighty. And if you have anyone in your network that you think could benefit from this webinar, feel free to put out a little tweet or some sort of, I don't know, LinkedIn post. The only two social media platforms I use ever are those two, so I always forget about like literally everything else. And we will get started shortly. We have some awesome questions that everyone submitted when they registered. So these are straight from you, they're not from anyone else. And TikTok, yes, Michael, I just started getting into TikTok and it's so dangerous.
My favorite, for sure.
We literally made a TikTok for the CXD Summit announcement, and I showed it to my partner and he was like, it's good, but I think I'm just a little bit like above the age of your target audience. And he's 28 and I'm like, oh gosh, no. if that's true, we should probably be thinking about non-TikTokifying our marketing, but I don't know. He was like, maybe you're ahead of the curve. I don't know. You never know with that stuff.
I like TikTok.
Huh, Rebecca?
I like TikTok, and I'm in my late 30s, so
okay,
good. There's some of us like it.
My mom is a huge fan. I get TikToks from her all the time.
It's such an interesting medium. I mean, the medium is the message, right? It's just like an amazing new thing, and for creators, it's awesome. But okay, we are off topic. I'm going to share the screen. I think everyone who's joining in has probably found us at this point. So welcome to how I use my background in writing as a conversation designer. All the attendees have submitted their questions, so we chose from that list, and we will introduce our wonderful panelists. So Gladys
Hello.
is a UX writer and a conversation designer based in Paris, France. She works as a freelancer and is also a consultant for Renault, a French multinational automobile manufacturer. Before becoming a UX writer, she spent more than 10 years in media relations. She represented brands such as HP, Bose, Google, Box, Samsung, and Kickstarter. Thanks so much for joining us today, Gladys.
Thank you, Priya.
All right, and Diana is an experienced conversation designer who came to design via the entertainment industry and script writing for documentaries, commercials, and theater. She is currently the design director at the Chicago-based digital product design and strategy firm Grand Studio, and the co-author with Rebecca Evanhoe, one of our other panelists, of the upcoming Rosenfeld book, Conversations with Things. Thanks for being here, Diana.
Thanks for having me.
And Rebecca has been designing technology that you talk to since 2011 at companies like Amazon Web Services, Mobiquity, and Shadow Health. She teaches conversation design as a visiting assistant professor at Pratt Institute. She has co-authored a book with Diana Diebo Conversations with Things, that comes out in 2021 with Rosenfeld Media. Thanks for being here, Rebecca.
Hey.
And last but definitely not least, Michoel shows teams and individuals around the world how to build better products and services through design. He's based in Chicago and he teaches about writing for interfaces, collaborative goal setting, building trust with users, and more. In addition to public speaking and teaching, he published his first book, Writing is Designing, Words and the User Experience, with co-author Andy Weffel in early 2020. Thanks for being here with us, Michoel.
Of course.
And we have attendees from all over the world, so thank you for joining us today. Some housekeeping. The session is being recorded. We will send it out after this session. And as we go, please feel free to ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A, whichever one you choose. We will have people looking at both. And I will turn off the music because we are starting in on the good stuff now. First question, Gladys, what are the top skills beyond writing that are indispensable as one transitions into a conversation design role?
The skills I will recommend are an ability to research and be interested in listening to people. I think it's going to be key because we need to think about use cases that are really different if you do voice or if you do chatbot. I think it's really helpful. What else? So researching, being curious, I think it's the top skill because we learn a lot just about the technology, about NLP, about writing in a different way. So we definitely need to be curious too.
Thanks, Gladys. Rebecca.
I'm gonna yes and everything Gladys just said, curiosity and research. The two that come to mind for me are one is like being creative in the presence of constraints, which applies to writing, it applies to coding, but like when you have some kind of limitations, how can you like creatively ideate within those? To me, that's like the skill that is kind of infused into all of our work. And then the other kind of workplace skill that I think comes up a lot is like being able to discuss the pros and cons of something. So there's no decision that's like always the best decision. It's always like, okay, if we make this change, what do we gain? What do we lose? And being able to think through and discuss that with people, I think is the other big one that I probably use every day.
Thanks, Rebecca. Michoel.
Yeah, I mean, everything that those two just said, I would add like just thinking about your work as design work is really important. So reading anything related to the field of design can be really helpful. But if I were to pick one skill, I would say facilitation is really critical. Being able to lead people through a process and guide them toward decisions as a group is really critical for conversation design. When I got to work with Rebecca in the past, that was something she did to get us all on the same page. You know, we're going to be writing sample scripts together and using those to inform how the work actually goes. So that's a really important one, I think.
Thanks, Michoel. And Diona.
I agree with all of that. And actually, the way that I think of what Michoel just said is kind of related to writing. And that to me, it feels a lot like storytelling. Like what you're doing is you're connecting the dots for people and helping them see how one thing relates to another thing. So to that end, what Michoel suggested of you kind of have to know more about design as a field is really helpful to know that you're speaking the same language and you can storytell within that language for people to understand why things need to happen in a certain order or the way that they do. And then beyond that, I would just say humility is like the top thing that I always look for in teammates and in employees, and honestly in bosses if I can get it too, because they're, especially with conversation design, you are going to be wrong. There is no way to get everything right ever. and the ability to be humble and aware of that going in, and then accepting gracefully of that as you move along makes the process so much easier.
Thanks, Diana. Those were all amazing answers. Rebecca, how do you define system and user personas?
I'll encourage Diana to hop in about this. We did, oh man, so much to say. So people use the term persona to mean two different things. In like the general UX world, if you say persona, it's shorthand for a user persona, which is like a fictionalized representation of different users to help you kind of think through people's needs. And then in conversation design, we talk about persona as the system's persona. So like Alexa's persona or your chatbot's persona. I probably every conversation I've had where the word persona has come up, there's like 2 people in the room who are using it differently. So Diana and I did this big survey for our book to try and figure out what term we were going to use to refer to it. And we decided to use personality, actually. Diana, I don't know if you want to hop in and add anything.
Sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button. Yeah, I think like this is what we have found is as much as you can steer away from using the word persona when it comes to the system, the clearer you're going to be. This goes back to that idea of speaking the same language with people in the room. And if people in the room are design people or business people who have some sort of design thinking background, persona is always going to link up with user persona. So when you think about like, how are we going to build this? How are we going to, what assumptions can we make? Those are all going to be linked in with the idea that people have around user persona. So starting by, I mean, we're all language nerds, so to a certain extent, language matters. But using a different word to define that right from the beginning helps to separate those a bit and set the expectation that those will be two different things.
So you're telling me that I should work with my design team on the bot's personality and not its persona.
I mean, we feel like personality is really specific and the term persona is already spoken for. But it's also in common use. Like this book here that always sits on my desk uses the term persona. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just a result of like conversation design. So many people come from so many different backgrounds that like terms are used differently in different fields. So we're all kind of trying to figure out like, what are we all talking about? And to go back to what Diana said, what's important is making sure that the people on your team are using kind of the same language.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. I can get on board with that. It makes sense. I mean, I think persona has been one of the most contested pieces of terminology in conversation design in the last few years. So
totally.
I love your take on it. Okay. Michael, what single skill from your writing background would you recommend conversation designers leverage more?
So for this one, I'm going to pick interviewing. I am a recovering journalist. Never quite made it in that world, but it's still my first love and it's something I care deeply about. And I think that it becomes so valuable in every aspect of a conversation design role. So whether you're interviewing stakeholders to understand their needs, whether you're interviewing users to discover the problem space, being really sharp in that area and being really clear in what you want to find out, doing planning and prep to make sure you're getting the answers you need. That's a really critical one. So I would say if you have that as a skill, try to develop it and try to bring that craft when you're doing conversation design as well.
So Michael, would you actually be interviewing the people that would be your potential users to find out like how they're thinking about that, or are you talking about interviewing other kinds of people involved?
Yeah, I mean, I think both. It goes back to what Gladys was saying about research being so important. So even if you're driving research, then interviewing is critical. Like just understanding people and understanding what their needs are. and doing that in a way that doesn't lead them in a certain direction. There's a lot of great writing out there to talk about how to do that effectively. But also, I think an undervalued one is to approach conversations with coworkers in that way and actually have a plan for how you're going to talk to them, have a plan for how you're going to talk to decision makers, write out your questions in advance. So I think the research one is a given, but I think like something that people may not always be utilizing is using it with your coworkers and using it with decision makers.
Michael. Gladys, what single skill would you recommend?
I completely agree with you, Michael. Interviewing, but the part I will focus on is when you write the interview, we have a lot of editing. I mean, nobody, even when you write a dialogue or when you write an interview, you have tons of things you have to edit because I don't have to explain that, but when you read an interview, we always say, oh, and we have tons of little sentence we use, and we need to edit again and again. So editing is something, it's a super critical skill when we do conversation design, I guess.
Thanks, Gladys. Okay. Diana, character development. Is this a useful practice in conversation design? We sort of just talked about that, but do you have anything more to say?
Yeah, I think this is super interesting because it is helpful, especially when you have multiple people working on any kind of system, to have a grounding as a group on what that personality is. So to that end, having a documentation and a development process for the character that the bot's going to have is really helpful so that everybody's on the same page. Where I think this gets dangerous maybe is when it's fun to do, right? Like, because you're making something up, and we don't get to make things up a lot in design because we have to ground it in reality. And this is one of the few places where you could potentially go bananas. And I think where it gets dangerous is when people forget the purpose of it and use it as like a playground as opposed to driving it as a means to an end, which the end is really supposed to be, we want to have something stable that people know how to interact with. We want to have a group mindset of what we're writing for so that we all have the same voice together. And what you design for on a character development from that perspective is more around behaviors and interactions rather than demographics and backstory. And so thinking about, it's not as much fun as to say like, well, she used to ride bicycles and was in races and was third place in her sophomore year of college in this one bike race. Like, what does that impact in terms of the way that they speak or the way they interact with people? So I think that's where I get on the fence about character development.
Thanks, Diana. Rebecca?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, Diana and I have spent a lot of time talking about this and sharing some of those horror stories of clients coming up with some wild personality. It's like, this will make a great one-woman show, but it's not going to make a very good chatbot. So yeah, in the main thing that we came to is like, we start with what we call interaction goals. What is this interaction trying to accomplish? Is it supposed to be really efficient? Is it supposed to be nurturing? Is it supposed to be relationship building? And then design the personality to serve those goals. And that's the part that I think people can get away from if they get a little too much into, like Diana said, the playground of coming up with a character.
Thanks, Rebecca. Gladys, what do you think?
I completely agree for the objectives. So if you do a customer service chatbot, you don't need a really strong voice. But then if you work for Disney for a specific movie, you need to create this universe. So it will really depend on the objective, on the client, on what you need to create. In fact, it's a project choice.
I'll speak up again and say, like, that is a hugely important point. Like, especially for what you just said, like if it's a bot that's supposed to be for fun, if it's supposed to be relationship building, if there are absolutely use cases where having a really deep backstory is important. Like Alexa and Siri have kind of backstories, and you can chit chat with them, and you're supposed to, because you're supposed to have a relationship with them. So yeah, it's like that kind of character development is really essential when it's called for. So I think ultimately, like getting back to like what is the core goals of this thing kind of helps you decide how much of a presence you need.
All right. Thank you all on that question. We have a quick intermission and a message from our sponsors. So if you haven't yet heard, the Conversation Design Summit 2021 is coming up. It is all about process. The theme is trust the process. So if you want to hear how other people, other real conversation designers or other people on conversation product teams are scaling their process in their org, or building out templates and processes for their team, those are the only topics we will be talking about. We aren't going to talk about the future of voice or anything like that. I love talking about that stuff too, but we are limiting the topics to process. And next, I wanted to call out Diona and Rebecca's book again. So there is a promo code that you can use to get 20% off their book, which expires April 30th. And the book is still on its way out, right?
Yeah, it's technically not in pre-sale yet, so you may have to wait if you want to pre-order this book. However, this is good at all of Rosenfeld Media. So Michoel, for example, you could buy that book with this today. And I'll probably give a shout out to a couple other books throughout here that are on there as well. There's a great library.
Perfect. And then, as we mentioned before, Gladys also has a book coming out later this year. The title is still a secret and the date is still a secret, but make sure to follow her so that you can learn those things as she posts about them. And back to the program. Michoel, how can I best document content decisions? How much of a research background is needed?
All right. So for this one, I kind of have an answer that may not satisfy everyone, but I think that like the best documentation is just enough and whatever works for the team that you're supporting. So I think one thing that I really want to stress is like, I don't think a research background is required. I think it all helps, but what's really important is that you include your rationale in however you're documenting your design and content decisions. So working with, if you have a research team, working with them and making sure you're surfacing those insights in whatever you bring forth to your team. And then also just thinking of the goals that Rebecca was just talking about and making sure you're tying things back to that. That all really helps prevent a lot of churn and like the swoop and poop stakeholder feedback that can come in and really change things at the last minute. So I think however you do it, really including your rationale, really leaning on research, those are really important things. And so I think like when it comes to how to best document them, you know, a lot of people are doing flows, and there are a lot of tools out there. I think you know, Botmock has a tool as well. You know, like those are all really neat, promising tools, but it comes up to like whatever works for the teams involved. So just make sure that you're kind of testing, like treat the team as your users, right? And be sensitive to their feedback too and what's working for them.
Thanks, Michoel. Gladys, how does your work compare to writing fiction or poetry? What would you have done differently when entering this field?
You know, I use a lot of fiction books. I mentioned that to Rebecca the other day. I read a book called Dialogue from Robert McKee. I really love it. And you know how to write for theater, for play, for movies, etc. And it helps a lot. I think we are not reinventing anything. We can learn a lot from what other writers have done. For poetry, I think it's a little bit like UX writing. just try to be concise, put, I mean, the good words, try to make sense, etc. I think it's not going to change a lot from that, but I'm learning a lot from other writers and people writing movies or TV shows, like on Shonda Rhimes on a masterclass, for example. I just loved what she did, or other people like that. You can learn a lot from other writers writing dialogues. And what would have, I don't know what I would have done differently. I still feel I'm completely new in the field. I have done one chatbot. I did not have, I mean, I don't have the background of all the other people here, but, you know, I know that I would have changed nothing, just continue learning. I know that I'm working more on NLP right now because I know how to make a chatbot, how to create flows. I just think we need to start from where we are, learn about UX, just like Michoel mentioned, learn about writing dialogues, and just be open to learning a lot and trying a lot.
Thanks, Gladys. Yeah, one thing I always love to call out, and actually one of our attendees, Ahmed, once said that anyone who claims that they are an expert in this field, don't believe them, because the paradigm is so new that we are all learning together and we can't be dogmatic. We have to be so open, and we're just literally all learning day by day together. So I love that answer, Gladys. Diana, how does your work compare to writing fiction or poetry?
I oftentimes miss writing fiction because you can just make things up. And like I said before, that's not what design is. You're not supposed to be making things up. You're supposed to ground them in actual reality and what real users do. And to that end, I think there is a lot of stuff that I learned from background in playwriting and screenwriting, which I love, Mickey. I love that you referenced that, Gladys. But the idea of write what you hear, like listen to people and write the way they speak, not the way you think they should speak. It's not an email. It's not a polished sentence. It is dialogue. And so people have verbal pauses, ums and likes and things like that, that are part of the language. And if you don't accommodate for that, then you're not actually writing conversation. You're just writing like emails and polished paragraphs in the framework of a conversation. And the thing that I would have done differently is I would have tried to pick up some design books before I started working in design. I tend to jump into everything and be like, oh, I'll figure it out when I get there. And then immediately, almost every single time, like 1 month in on the dot, I'm like, oh, what have I done? I don't know anything and panic. So I think I probably would have tried to prepare myself a little bit more.
Thanks, Diana. Michoel?
Yeah, so I actually would reference an article that I go back to a lot by Nicole Fenton on this topic. And one of the quotes from that article, the article is called Words as Material, and I'll put a link in the chat in case anyone's interested. But Nicole actually says, like, I don't write fiction or short stories. I use language to solve problems. And I think that's the big difference when you're writing for a software interface, that you really have to be aware of what the user needs are and meet those. And it's neat to see how poetry, for example, can inform the writing and how it can influence it. But at the end of the day, it's really important to realize that it's not a creative expression that you've made. It's something that you need to be really comfortable with changing and treating as a first draft that needs to meet users' needs. If it's not doing that, then it's not what we need. So I'll put that link in the chat in case anyone's interested. But to me, that's the core thing. And I also think that, like, when you're entering the field, going back to what others have said already, like really learning about research and really learning how to identify those user needs and not just make assumptions about them. That's really critical. And that's what I would have done more of early on.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think, Diana, especially to your point, lately it seems like not just in conversation design, but in all kinds of copywriting, we're generally moving away from this more structured, academic, grammatically correct tone and shifting towards a conversational tone in everything. And I think the advent of texting and social media and writing the way people speak is holding true for website copy and chatbot copy and all kinds of copy nowadays, where before it was much more rigid, you know. Rebecca, how do I tap into my creative side to improve my report writing skills?
This is so I think this question is about how, if you're just like, you're not writing for a chatbot, you're just writing for like some form of documentation or something. How do we be more creative in that pursuit? Is that how other people read this question?
The same way.
Okay. Yeah. So this question was really interesting to me. I think I have some really concrete things that everybody should do if they're trying to like write creatively. And one of them is, this is the classic, whatever you're writing, read it out loud. Like that is such a good way to see if something that you're writing actually sounds awkward when you say it. So I think that's like the most practical thing. Like how do I be more creative, or like how do I sort of be a little bit more meta or self-aware of what I'm writing and how it's coming off? That's the thing to do. But in terms of other creative techniques for like the kinds of more boring, I'll say, writing that we do in the tech industry, starting with a story is a really good technique, or like an anecdote. Like if your report is about a new feature that you think should get in there, or maybe there's a process, something you're like, hey, this process is inefficient, maybe we should look into it. Starting with an anecdote of why that happened, like what brought you there, I think is a really good technique. I'm trying to be really concrete because I think questions like this can be, esoteric, but I do love like the spirit of this question, which is like, how do we make, like, all of us do a lot of writing, whether you're a conversation designer or you're not, you're probably writing a lot in your job. And I love this person being like, how do I make this like more creative? So I'd be curious to see what the other panelists think about this one though.
Yeah, anyone want to add to that? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
The only thing I can, sorry. No, but we write for everything. So if it's for a report, you want to make sure people are going to read it. You don't want that to be dry and interesting. So definitely, even in emails, sometimes I try to do an interesting title, but when it's reporting or a documentation, just let's try to make it fun, and maybe in the mood of the product too, if it's possible. At least you know that people are going to get into this universe and will be happy to read it.
The other thing I would add to that is we are all pretty non-visual people, being that we work in an oral medium, but it is people grab onto visuals, and it's a great communication tool. So if you're thinking about how to share out information, even simple diagrams or clip art, if you want, I don't care, something that like helps connect the information that you're saying in the words to a visualization really helps people remember what you're saying and grab onto it.
I like, Diana, you're making me think of like the line, this meeting should have been an email. There's also this email should have been a picture. I think that's so great.
All right. Diana, what are some tips on writing compelling dialogue?
I always give this advice, and it sounds so creepy, but I have yet to come up with a better way to say it. Eavesdrop on people. And by that, I mean, like, go sit like when you can, again, I guess now it's probably harder to do, but like sit on a park bench or sit in a coffee shop and just listen to people and write what they're saying. And don't think about what they're saying, just write what they're saying. And it will give you an understanding and raw material to work from of what are the patterns of conversation. You can start to see when people like cut each other off, when there's context surfacing, people will introduce different topics and then circle back around to that previous topic. The way in which they do that, the way in which they phrase things, when people know like how to take turns, all of that stuff you can get just from listening to people talk and breaking it down I used to do this when I was learning TV writing. Law and Order episodes are like incredibly formulaic, and you can sit there with a timer and just like they are to the minute, things happen in a certain order. Similarly, if you are writing down these kinds of just random conversations, you'll be able to kind of pick out the patterns and the timings of when things happen and be able to create a structure. I won't say a formula because that's too far on the science side, but like a structure that you can work within to understand how the actual interactions of conversation work.
Thanks, Diana. And I have to put in a quick plug for Linguists too, because if you are interested in what she was just saying about that structure of conversation, Linguists have a whole discipline called conversation analysis that you can check out too. But yes, okay, the requisite linguist plug. But Gladys, what are some tips on writing compelling dialogue for you?
I would say role play is super helpful. I think this is also where having a personality for your chatbot or voice bot is going to be key, because if you really know what age, I mean, if you go that far, but if you have an idea of who the chatbot or the bot is, it's going to help you get into that research and know how do those people talk. If they are that age, what will they say, what word will they use, etc. So it's a mix of creating this persona or this personality and doing research, and just as Diana suggested, listen to the people in that group, pick the word they use, and start creating the voice of your bot. Yeah. And I will say read aloud. I think it helps just a lot, making sure that everything is smooth and flows and right. I think we do that for any type of product. It's a recommendation you have for any type of writers, but it really helps.
Thanks, Gladys. Michael, what are your tips?
I think Diana and Gladys covered a lot of it, but I would also add like lightweight testing can be really great as early as you can do it. One of my favorite examples is a team that I was working with who gave test participants a cell phone. This was pre-COVID, but we were out on the street and they would give the test participant a COVID. I'm sorry, they wouldn't give COVID. Oh my goodness. They would give them a cell phone. Oh my goodness. They would give them a cell phone and they would be around the corner with a laptop, like feeding dialogue in as they text. So that gave like really early raw examples of how they would respond to the conversation and whether it was natural.
That's awesome, Michael. That sounds like a fun project.
It was like 2 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, Rebecca, tips for working with other voice experts like linguists. Tips when there are no other experts beyond yourself and a UX designer.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the jobs that I've had, I've been the only person and like kind of wearing a lot of hats. And so in that instance, I think the most practical advice I have is like when you're by yourself, this goes back to some earlier stuff, document all the decisions, even if it's just in a spreadsheet called decision log. That helps you, that helps like the whole team. I find that like when I'm by myself, I have to kind of wear like the chief documentation hat and do a little bit of self and team product managing, just like, here's how we're going to work on stuff, like here's how things break down. So document everything and just sort of accept that you're going to have to manage yourself and maybe others too. Because I think there's some inherent, like the role of a conversation designer is sort of inherently one that requires some advocacy. Working with other voice experts, that is always super exciting to me when I'm not the only person. So that's always like a true joy. And the reason I love it so much is because like, if, you know, I'm making this up, but like if Diana and I built a chatbot together, even though we have spent a year combining our voice into one for the book, we would still have totally different takes on stuff. We would still have different opinions, different ways of writing things, you know, and I think talking through those and kind of figuring out together, like, okay, let's try it. That's really like my favorite form of collaboration. So I guess the tip out of that is when you're working with other people, just like be willing to try out the thing, even if it's not like what you think you should do. Always be willing to like, well, let's try it your way and see how it goes. You can learn a lot and be surprised that way.
Thanks, Rebecca. Gladys?
On my project, I've been, just like Rebecca, I've been the only one. And so what my strategy was to organize workshop with other experts, also co-creating with them, like customer service and other people from different countries, I mean, depending on the project, but just make sure we have different voice and different perspectives. But I was the one knowing all the steps and the strategy, and I was the one designing the flows and the dialogues, everything. But just, so I made sure to work with them to make sure they understand, make sure that this is a work and it's not just about writing like they tend to guess. There is a methodology, and I think that's been really helpful to get other people on board and understand that this is work. So yeah, it's not just it's not a play, it's work, it's design.
Gladys, your answer made me think of a new question, so maybe we can come back to everyone on this. But how do you change the way that you present your works in progress depending on who your team is composed of? So if anyone wants to answer that, please do. But Diana, do you want to first answer this question?
I totally do. If it is a set of people who understand conversation design, they're other conversation design experts, we can just dive in and they know what to look for. They know how to like pull things apart. And I would even say most development people know that too, if they've spent any time in conversation development. I might caveat it if it's somebody new to me to say like, hey, I know, like I want to hear the feasibility stuff. So give some space to say, this is where we're going to talk feasibility, or this is where we're going to talk just you as a human. How does this feel? Let's talk about things that way and give context around the feedback I need at any given moment. But in general, I think that is a structure that I take for anybody who's not in that particular, and this kind of goes for all design, that particular realm of design is, this is what I'm going to present to you. This is the kind of feedback that I'm looking for that only you can give. And here's where we're going to, like, any other concerns, this is when they are going to get addressed. So people aren't like worried about, oh, but I didn't get to say that one thing that I think you really need to hear, but you just don't need at this moment in time. Kind of giving them some sense of when they'll get to weigh in on that.
Thanks, Diana. Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I I do a lot of context setting when I give people different documentation. And usually like I'm often joining new teams and I'm often the newest person on the teams because I do freelance stuff. So a lot of times I'll do what Diana said, where it's like, before I do anything, I'll sit down with the team and be like, hey, these are the kinds of documents I usually produce. What documents have you guys made that worked well? What, you know, if I handed this to you, would you find that useful? And actually have kind of a meta conversation about it kind of helps create buy-in and figure out, like, if I make a thing and everybody on this team tells me they're not going to use it, I'm not going to waste my time. So a lot of consideration, I think, goes into like, how do you communicate the complexity of a conversation design to different people?
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay. Michoel, how do localization and conversation design work together?
Oh yeah, okay. I would love to. I know Gladys' name isn't on this, but I'd love to get her thoughts on this as well. But I think there's a lot to be learned about how plain language helps with localization. So if you follow Sarah Winter's work at all, author of the book Content Design, which is a great one. And I think the more plain language you can get with your dialogue, the more you can use terms that are not rooted in like cultural idioms or complex multi-syllable terms, like all those things will really help the process of localization. And I think just in my past experience, developing a relationship in that type of environment is really important. So it's not just tossing things over the fence to the localization team, but really understanding their goals and treating them as co-designers in the process.
And I can add, yeah, but just Michael said, I think he said it all, but just like when we, whatever we write, we need to make sure it's going to work for different countries. So we need to make sure that if you write something, we have enough room for other countries. I mean, look, if you translate in German, for example, it's going to be longer. So if there is no room, of course, it's not going to work for the German team. So we need to think about other countries, to think about plain language, to think about all the idioms we use. And so either it's co-design and they can find the sentence that work in their country, or we need to use plain language to make sure it's going to be useful for anyone.
I would add a quick plug to introduce those people into your workflow as early as you can, because there will be things, even if you're not changing languages, but you're just localizing, things like zip code in the US and zip code in Europe get placed differently in a sentence structure when somebody's, like if you're asking somebody to input that. And you need to know that from a development standpoint and the code you're building, as well as the language that you're putting forth. So that's going to break something bigger later if you don't get those people earlier in.
And for anyone who's really interested in this question, our last AMA was about this. So we had an entire hour just talking about localization and translation in conversation designs. Deviansh can maybe throw that link into the chat. All right, Gladys, how can I as a writer become a conversation designer? Are portfolios necessary?
I think anyone can be one if we want to give it a try. There's plenty of there's plenty of resources online, books, and it depends if you want. I mean, maybe you can start with a chatbot without NLP. Just try to be a decision tree, and this is what I've done at the beginning. And then say, okay, how do I write better dialogue and what do I do, etc. Like I said, and like we all mentioned, read about writing dialogue. Make sure you find a good use case first, because we mentioned that earlier, but the case is the key of the design, of course. So find a good use case, try to do your research and play with words and try and test. And yes, a portfolio will be necessary as for any design work. We always need to showcase our work, but also show our thinking, just like we will do with UX writing. So show the different version of your writing and the problem, the decision, etc. Every step you can demonstrate will be useful for your portfolio.
Thanks, Gladys.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So I'm just gonna hop in. Yeah. So for me, it's like I get this question a lot, and I think there's like, to be really practical, there's like 4 ways in. One is if you work at a company already, find out if any team in your company is doing anything with the chatbot. Because like by now there might be some weird, like maybe there's 2 developers on a totally different part of the business who are making a chatbot together, and you can find out that they're doing it and be like, hey, I'm a writer. I would love to like see the copy and spruce it up for you, and just kind of stick your toe into that doorway. You can try and find a startup that is making something and say like, hey, I'd love to get more experience with this. Can I work and just like do some copy edits for you, or like help you with some writing things, and get involved that way. You can work on a project yourself, which I think you kind of have to do to learn, like make a chatbot, you know, using a program like Botmock, just so you have something you can show. And then the last thing I think people should probably do more often is like, if you're a writer, like you have a writing background, just apply for conversation design roles. Like just go ahead and do it. You never know what's going to happen. And you can kind of really strongly position your skills to be like, you can be like, I can do like most of the things in this list of job requirements. And if you can do that, then like you might as well just throw your hat in the ring. Because conversation design is really high demand right now, and there's a lot more junior roles opening up. So those are the 4 things to try if you want to get in.
Thanks, Rebecca. Michael?
So yeah, I think everything that we're going to say this a lot, everything the other 2 folks said are really good. But I would also add that like I want to focus on the portfolio question, because I think that's something that people struggle with, myself included, a lot. Like, what should be in there? What do I need it? I would say like portfolios really help. And when I was hiring conversation designers, what I would look for is the systems thinking and the interest in research and in identifying user needs. So the portfolio doesn't have to be conversation design, right? Like it doesn't have to be voice projects or chatbots that you've done. It just needs to show that you're aware of how to write for an interface and how that's different from writing for, like a marketing kind of application or something. So to me, that's the really critical difference, is like, what are you demonstrating? And I think portfolios can also be really flexible. Like there's kind of a myth out there that they all need to be a website and they all need to be the same for every employer. Mine is most recently just like a slide deck that I swap things in and out of. So anyways, be flexible and try to demonstrate your thinking more than worrying about the specific projects.
And can I add something?
Yeah.
I believe that we are at the point where it's the beginning for a lot of countries. So sometimes just trying and showing that you have tried is the best opportunity you can have. At least when someone asks you if you can do it, you can show something, and it's going to be better than someone who has nothing to show. So just give it a try. And in my case, I have my mission at Renault, and they did not ask me if I already did a chatbot. They said, we have a chatbot to do. And they had the idea that I could do it. And because I wanted to do it, I had to read and do everything possible and ask questions to people just to give it a try and make sure I could do it correctly. So today, I think the point is just to try.
And one thing I would also like to add is that I came from a world where I had never even like really known that portfolios were something anyone but artists had, like literal painters. So this idea of portfolios was brand new to me when I graduated from college, and I started to realize that they're very important if you want to showcase your work. And it's really hard to like remember all the work that you do in the past. So I've really had to train myself to document everything and just like do that for my own self, and because no one's gonna like tell you to do it. And I actually started, like, I really appreciate this now, because I was never a great test taker, like in college and high school. Like I would get great scores on writing and stuff and literature, but I could never really do great on other kinds of tests. So having a portfolio is, in a way, like for me, it seems like you're sort of getting around this whole test thing, because you can honestly just demonstrate everything you know in front of someone, and you're not like sitting there being tested. And obviously some job interviews will have questions that you'll need to study up on and prepare for, but I've grown to just really appreciate the fact that you can showcase your work in its best possible light and just have that as something that you can communicate to a hiring manager or whoever you're communicating it to. And then Elaine had a question. Diana, do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, I'm assuming she's talking about like homework or an on-site task. She was asking about how much work and design should you put into a job assessment during the interview process for conversation design. I think the whole idea of being asked to do that by an employer is kind of a separate topic and has a lot of ethical complications, in my opinion. But from the interviewee's side, I think it depends on how badly you want this job, how badly you want to work for this person, and how much you genuinely have to give. I have been in positions where I've been asked to do homework for jobs. And sometimes I've had the time before I had a kid, before I was like, when I wasn't working full time or at an agency, I definitely had more time to do that than afterwards. So I have done it before for jobs where I spent like 8 to 10 hours doing homework and then creating a portfolio that was custom for them and going in and going through the full. No, this is not while I was writing a book, Michoel. I'm not that bananas. But to that point, like there are times in my life where I've been asked to do this and I'm just like, I can't. I have a full-time job that demands a lot of me. I have family obligations. I have life obligations. Like it's not, and I've turned down the job and told them why, because I'm not, and I've offered to do other things instead. And so like, if that's where you're at, where you want the job or you want to continue the process, but you just physically can't accommodate a request, which I will just say, I think is a ridiculous request to ask somebody to do that much free labor. It's okay to say that. And it's okay to tell them why, because the more people tell them that this is not okay, the less it will be common in the industry. But in the meantime, that doesn't help you get the job. So I think it's really more of a personal matter to what can you commit to? And if you can't commit to that, is there anything else you could swap out? Could you say, I can't do homework and a custom portfolio, but I could do one of those for you? Just think about like what you actually physically can do.
Can I just add? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rebecca.
No, go ahead, Michoel.
I just want to add, it's a good test in a way for what it will be like to work for that company. Like if they're asking you to do a lot of extra work and you push back, consider that the way they handle that could also be how they push back when you're on the job, right? Like how they handle that pushback. Also, like if they're expecting, I would say like personally, I would never want to put more than an hour into one of those take-home assignments. And if they're thinking that it's more, then like you really, as Diana said, you get into dangerous ethical territory of doing free work. So I think like that's an advantage of portfolios. That's kind of how I use them in hiring, rather than doing those exercises to get an idea of the person's skills. And I think that's the advantage they have, is that you can do that type of assessment without asking people to do work for your company before they're hired.
You could also ask them what they're looking for. Why are they asking you to do the homework? Because you might have existing work that addresses that. And that's another like potential swap you could offer them.
Yeah, consider that like a company that doesn't have empathy for people they're interviewing may also have trouble having empathy for their users.
Rebecca, did you want to add one more thing?
No, nailed it. 100% all of that.
Cool. Yeah, and I would also add, from the perspective of a hiring manager, I want to, like, the first priority is a culture fit. So if someone is really amazing and I think that they could really grow into a role, I just need to know a little bit more about like what they already know and what they can already demonstrate, then a lot of times I've had candidates just take that extra step themselves and just bring me something. So that can be, and that's like really amazing from my perspective. I'm just like, this person really is invested. They really want this. I really appreciate this. And it makes them stand out beyond a lot, like amongst all the candidates. So I don't necessarily ask them for it, but if you just take that extra step and maybe have something that you show them on your own, that could be a way to stand out as well, if you have the time to do that.
And if you don't, I think just telling them how excited you are and how much you want to work there, to me as a hiring manager, feels equally meaningful, because I know that not everybody has that bandwidth to just create things on the side. Yeah,
definitely. I feel like a lot of times I have held back in like expressing my excitement about a role, because I feel like that's like how you be professional and you don't want to like seem desperate. But I think in reality, it's just so much better to be honest about like how invested you are and how, you know, how you really feel about potentially working on this. Okay, we have 1 more minute and a couple more questions. So I don't want to go over time, but Diana, Gladys, and Michoel, do you think you could stick around for like 1 to 2 more minutes if we, oh, actually it's 1 o'clock. I really want to be respectful of everyone's time. So let's end here. We did get through a lot of questions, which is awesome. Obviously the recording will be sent out, and maybe I will take these questions and maybe we can use them in a round 3 for leveraging your background in writing as a conversation designer. So maybe we'll have that later this year. And we really appreciate you all being here. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the attendees. That was an awesome conversation. Yeah, we really appreciate your time. And please let us know if you have any feedback about this webinar, if you have any topics that you want to see in future AMAs. We have these each month, so we are really just building these around you, what our attendees want to hear. And yeah, I think that's all I've got. Any last words from any panelists?
Can I shameless plug that I'm hiring for my team right now?
Of course.
I sort of just did anyways.
What are you hiring for, Michoel?
Senior content designer role. It's not a conversation design role. You might be working with traditional screen-based interfaces more, but
cool.
I imagine the crowd would be into it.
Well, in that case, I'm going to shameless plug as well. Mine's more on the research side, but again, any storytellers or people that are generally curious, I think will probably fit in well. So I'll drop that in the chat as well.
Awesome. All right. Here are all our panelists' Twitter handles. Follow them. And we will see you at the next AMA. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Brielle. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.